Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Manchester is Red podcast. I'm Tyrone Marshall hosting today, joined by Samuel Luckhurst, my travelling companion on Saturday, spending pretty much an entire day together on a very sunny trip to the South Coast and a very rewarding trip to the South Coast. It's going to be an upbeat, positive podcast for once, Samuel.
I know. My voice doesn't do me justice because, as people might tell, I've got a cold at the moment, so it's my exotic singing voice or something like that. But no, it really does betray the positivity of having a very serene and comfortable and competent United win to write about. I'm struggling to recall the last time that happened.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, hopefully that cold isn't on its way to me after 8 hours in a car on Saturday, but we'll find out. It is the as we were talking about, it's a time for colds with young children as well, so I'm sure it's the first of many.
Yeah.
But let's get to the football, and like you say, it turned into an excellent win. Southampton 0, United 3. I think when the team dropped in the press room an hour and a quarter beforehand, I think there was a few of us fearing the worst, and having spent the entire week debating whether it was Casemiro or Agati in United's midfield, it was Eriksen. But I mean, in the end, like we say, you leave thinking it was one of the best away performances in a long time. Can't remember the last time they played that well away from home, and it's just a very convincing victory.
After the first 30 minutes, it was they were completely different. They were unrecognisable from the first half an hour, where the performance was unsettling. They were under the cosh a few times. The lad on the right, who obviously got the better of Dallo a couple of times, I've forgotten his name already, unfortunately, but he was really impressive, and obviously got the penalty, and the game completely changed with that penalty. And credit to United, they were jolted by it. They had a pretty good opportunity just before they scored from the penalty, with Xerxes having that shot saved, and of course they scored from the corner. And really, those two quick goals, and let's face it, over the last year or so, it's been mainly United conceding two goals in quick succession. And on this occasion, it was them meting out that treatment to Southampton, two pretty clinical finishes from Matthijs de Ligt and Marcus Rashford. Very positive for those two individuals that they got goals. Positive for the two of them that they had good performances as well. And really, Southampton didn't show up in the second half. I think we're so wary of covering United and getting ahead of ourselves that when Ten Hag started making some unenforced changes anyway, and the back four changed completely at the end of the game, it was completely different from the back four that started. And you wondered at the back of your mind, God, could they really cock this up somehow, given that there's the unwritten rule of not changing your back four. Fortunately for United, fortunately for us as well. Jack Stevens side down Alejandro Garnacho, and that was very much it done and dusted. And Garnacho added a bit of gloss to the scoreline, but 3-0 didn't flatter United whatsoever. They created a lot of good chances, and in fairness, during that first 30 minutes, they did have one or two pretty good openings, particularly Xerxes' chance when he didn't really connect with it from Eriksen's cross. So I think Southampton were always gettable, but the game completely changed with that back pass of a penalty from Cameron Archer.
Yeah, we were talking afterwards. It felt like a real sort of sliding doors moment, given how poor United had been for half an hour. Southampton had been on top and comfortably on top for 15, 20 minutes, really, in that game. Didn't carry a cutting edge, got a gift to take the lead. And like we say, Onana came up with the save. And I mean, it kind of feels like a big moment already, because if that penalty goes in, the way the game was going, I'm not sure United have it in them to come back. And fair play, they did sense their moment. I mean, Ten Hag spent virtually all of last season complaining about the lack of a turning point for his team, the lack of a moment. Even in May, he was still talking about that Arsenal game in September that could perhaps have been different, a few minor, significant moments towards the end. It kind of felt like this was the opposite, that 8-minute spell, very early doors, but it could be a turning point in United's season, could be a turning point for Ten Hag, because like we say, if that penalty goes in, given the levels of confidence, given the way the game was going, I'm not sure United come back and win it. But Onana made the save and they sensed their moments. And I mean, time will tell, but it did feel like it had the potential to be a really big 8 minutes in this season.
The proof of it will be in the pudding with the Palace game and the Tottenham game coming up. But suddenly those two matches, they don't look as potentially daunting as they did pre-match at Southampton. Not just because of United's win and performance, but Palace still haven't won a game this season, and Tottenham. Looking at them, I've watched them a couple of times this season, and they look very Tottenham. They've overspent on a striker who looks like he's not up to it at that level, and they've got some good forwards, but they all seem to be in pretty flaky form at the moment, so they're struggling. And United have got them technically next week, isn't it, on the Sunday? So it's just amazing what a weekend can do in terms of the confidence around the place and the belief and the perception of United as well. And of course, they beat probably the worst or the weakest team in the league, but certainly in the first half an hour, it didn't felt like that because Southampton did have a good go. There was I think it was the most gargantuan if I've ever come across in football when Russell Martin said afterwards, if we, as in Southampton, had United's players in the finishing chances, we'd have won that game. I don't think the day will ever come where Southampton will be having the equivalent of Bruno Fernandes in their team, or I suppose they've spent close to 36.5 million on Joshua Zirkzee, but it still just did seem the most pointless of ifs to ever invoke at a post-match press conference. And you look at that performance of United, I think individually and as a collective, it was a good day for everyone, even players who didn't necessarily play well. Dalot got an assist at the end. I thought Mainu was very subdued again in the first half, but he did see out the game, and he's been coming off in games recently. Obviously, his position with England has changed a bit, but I think that would have done his confidence the world of good, just actually playing out the whole game, because I think there was certainly a point in the second half where it might have seemed prudent to take him off and put Ugarte on, but it was Eriksen who stayed on. And as for another of the handful of the other players, or a lot of the other players, they pretty much played well. I mean, I thought Martinez was back to his old self. Banana's penalty save was crucial, and he has got form for that. Of course, he saved one from Jordan Larson in the Copenhagen game last year. He's made some penalty shootout saves as well. I think it's safe to say that although David De Gea is probably a better shot stopper, I don't think David De Gea is anywhere near as good at saving penalties as Andre Onana is. Garnacho was electric when he came on, but for me, the man of the match was Amads. I thought it was a really quite telling that when United weren't playing well, he was playing well. And if you're doing that in pretty testing circumstances, as a 22-year-old who has only just really established himself as a first teamer, that there's a chance that he could have a very, very good season.
Yeah, I mean, let's go on to Amad then. It's going to go on to individual performances. He's probably the best place to start. Like I say, I would say he was man of the match. I mean, he was fantastic again. His dribbling ability is remarkable, really, and it's a really, it's very neat and tidy dribbling. He's very hard to stop once he gets going. He looks a constant threat at the moment, a constant danger when he's running at people. And he is just, when we were debating on the way down and all week about what changes there might be, one in midfield, and you kind of expected perhaps one on the wing. Maybe Rashford dropped in the end. It was Garnacho, but it kind of feels like Rashford and Garnacho competing for the one place now, because Amad is the left-footed right winger that United have spent years looking for, essentially, and he was there under their noses all along.
I couldn't agree with you more there. I thought the moment that stood out for me was in the first half, and I looked up for a piece. It was in the 19th minute where there was a lofted pass from Nasraoui. It was just after Walker Peters had gone past Delit, and he hadn't got it right. He should have at least forced a save from Banana or found a teammate. It was a pretty good opportunity. And United went on this break, and Mazraoui's pass was a little bit loose. It was positive, but it wasn't straight to Amad. He was in a foot race with I forget his name, the midfielder. Is he on loan from Chelsea?
Kochwi or Koch, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Leslie.
Yeah. Yes, Leslie. Just call him Leslie. But Amad was in a foot race with Leslie, and it looked like, because of Leslie's size, and clearly more physically imposing than Amad, that he would win out. But if you look at it again, Amad just he just arches his run to get his body in the way of Leslie, so that he keeps the ball. He spins, has a look up, sees Fernandes on the far side, plays the ball to him perfectly, and United had a half decent chance there. And I thought with wingers can, well into their 20s, they can madden managers, they can madden supporters with their decision making. But Amads' decision making was faultless all afternoon. That opportunity he gave Rashford when he was on the overlap, and it actually led to Rashford's goal because they scored from the corner. The timing of it was perfect, and it was a really good opportunity for Rashford. He probably should have scored, and of course they scored from the corner. Amads got the assist for that. Not necessarily a skillful or a difficult assist, but he did make the right decision again in seeing that Rashford was there. It was on his side. There was an opportunity to have a shot, and Ramsdale reacted a bit late, and suddenly United 2-0 up. So he was easily the man of the match for me. I suppose with rights holders, they're always going to look at who scored and who scored and kept a clean sheet, and that's why De Ligt was an easy choice. But I certainly thought Martinez was the more complete centre back for United, even though of course he didn't score and De Ligt did. But Amad was terrific, and he's just had a really, really good year since he came back against Forest away last season. After he'd been out for 5 months with that knee injury, I think it was, wasn't it, that he sustained in New Jersey. And he had good cameos coming on in games when United were either losing or drawing. Then he got his first start against Arsenal, did very well in that, did even better a few days later against Newcastle, getting the goal. I thought he was excellent during pre-season, probably United's best player of pre-season. And although it would have been a little bit harsh to have dropped him for the FA Cup final, I don't think anybody disapproved that decision by Ten Hag. It was logical. But come their United stay at Wembley at the start of this season against City, Amad started. He deserved to because of his pre-season form. And he just looks at home at United. He doesn't look like a winger who is finding his feet anymore. It looks like that he's found his feet at the risk of speaking too soon. And of course, there'll be some more testing encounters that come up in the coming weeks. But so far this season, I think he was pretty decent against Fulham. He was their best attacker against Brighton. He was bright when he came on against Liverpool. He was good in the Community Shield. And of course, he was... from you and me anyway, he was their man of the match at Southampton.
Yeah, definitely. And you kind of leave the game thinking suddenly there's competition for places out wide here. I've been changing my mind on a weekly basis, I think, in terms of the wingers this season and what they're contributing. I mean, we're kind of just writing Anthony off at the moment. That's 1 minute now in his last 8 games for United. It kind of summed it up that he was actually going to come on for, I think, the last 3 or 4 minutes until De Ligt went down injured and Casemiro got the call instead to come on. Sums up where he is. But when you look at, Garnacho again off the bench and scoring, but for Xerxes' knee at Brighton, he'd have been off the bench and scoring or assisting in all 4 sub appearances this season. It's only Brighton now where he hasn't contributed a goal or an assist off the bench. Rashford, I mean, Ten Hag made the point afterwards that he felt there was too much negativity around him after the Liverpool game. I think, we've both kind of said we agree with that he did create the 2 best chances against Liverpool. He wasn't as poor. I think there was frustration in the stands at the time that he didn't take Canate on in one particular instance. But, I said at the time, I don't think it would have been a wise move to take him on. And he did create the 2 best chances. He got his goal and Ten Hag was talking then up about how important it is to get off the mark. And suddenly you look at, even forgetting Anthony, you look at those 3 and there's 3 wingers competing for 2 places who could be effective. And in a way, I mean, Garnacho started 38 games in a row at the end of last season. But the more he contributes and plays off the bench, in a way, the more he's going to play on the bench because he's kind of making this role for himself as a super sub now. Yeah,
and the negativity around Rashford, as you said, it was from supporters. I didn't see anyone in the press picking him out after that game. He obviously got some stick after the Brighton match, and that was deserved. And Shearer spelt it out on Match of the Day on Saturday when he said that after the Brighton game, he deserved criticism. When he plays like he did against Southampton, he's not going to get criticism. He's going to get praise. That is how it works. That is how it has always worked. And there are still some people out there who struggle to comprehend that for whatever reason. But maybe it's because players are more sensitive, or their online followings are more sensitive and more vocal these days, that we hear more about it. But Rashford played well at the weekend. I thought he was doing okay, even when United were struggling at 0-0. His collaboration with Xerxes on a couple of occasions looked quite promising. Xerxes is getting a lot of chances, which is good, but he's obviously he's not taking them. He's probably taken the most difficult of all the goal scoring opportunities he's had with that debut goal against Fulham. But ultimately, if they've got Amad, Garnacho, and Rashford in form, it's a cliched good headache for Ten Hag to have. And you look at Rashford's form this season, he's not actually struggled for opportunities. He has been in the thick of it. He had 2 great chances in the Community Shield. He had a great chance against Fulham, which he passed up with a poor layoff for Garnacho. Against Brighton, fair enough, like disallowed goal, but he was he's a fair way offside. Liverpool, he created, as you said, chances for Xerxes in that game, and the stick he got from the match goers I thought was really harsh. And then at the weekend, he got 1 goal. There were a couple of saves from Ramsdale as well, one from distance, one from inside the area. So he's not on the fringes, or he's not on the periphery of United's attacks. He is involved, and maybe that goal at the weekend will be the moment. Ten Hag used that ketchup analogy that people have used since time immemorial in football, and hopefully that's the case for him. There's an argument that just to start him against Barnsley, because it's an opportunity to get a couple more goals and just to continue that momentum that he's got from his weekend performance. And it was a good hit. It was a shot that Ramsdale should have saved. He didn't read it well at all, but Rashford asked the question of him, as he asked the question of Ramsdale last season at Arsenal, where everyone knew what he was going to do, and it was still too good for Ramsdale to keep out.
Yeah, absolutely. And it should be said that he did get criticism in the stands and frustration in the stands against Liverpool, but the away end went through a sustained rendition of the Rashford is Red song after his goal at the weekend, and clearly had his back. That's all for the first part of the podcast. We'll be back after the break to look ahead to Barnsley on Tuesday. Welcome back to the Manchester is Red podcast. Cup action for United next, then Barnsley at home in the Carabao Cup on Tuesday. A tournament that Cristiano Ronaldo is not putting too much store in, judging by his comments last week, but one that Ten Hag has already won and always offers the chance of an early trophy in a season. It kind of feels like a much more routine game than it did maybe on Friday afternoon, and certainly after half an hour on Saturday. Suddenly it feels like this is a chance for United just to get another pretty easy win in the bag.
Absolutely. Barnsley are doing all right in League One, aren't they? I'm not too sure what their result at the weekend was. I'm literally now seeing where they were, but they were in the playoff places. They're now no longer in the playoff places. It looks like they lost at the weekend. So, that's not a surprise. It seems that it happens quite often that if a lower league club have got a big game, big cup tie coming up against one of the big hitters, their mind wanders to that, and their league form suffers as a consequence of it. But Ten Hag doesn't really rotate much. There've been only 2 games, I think, that really spring to mind where he made a lot of changes, and one of them was in a League Cup tie against League One opposition in Charlton back in January 2023, which would have been a quarter final, I think it was, and United had City at home at Old Trafford in the league 4 days later, so it was completely logical to make those changes. And United won relatively easily. It might have ended up 3-0, I think. And looking ahead to this game, you would want to see, I think, from our perspective, United fans, certainly their hardcore followers, hate it, but whenever they're drawn at home in the League Cup or the FA Cup, we're relieved, because it means there's not certainly with the League Cup, there's not a midweek journey to somewhere distant from Manchester. We're at home. It's going to be quiet at Old Trafford, given that there are other games going on in the Cup and also in the Champions League. So we just want as relaxing a night as possible. And I imagine there'll be a vacant seat next to you as well in the press box, which is always a result, given that this isn't exactly a game to set the pulses racing. But we also want to see Manuel Ugarte start, because that's an angle to go at with what we'll be writing about. It'd be great to see Harry Amads start, because he's not made his debut yet. He's not even been on the bench for United this season, which is a bit of a surprise given his pre-season form. I think there was a lot of myself included, a lot of people expected him to start in the Community Shield. Does Casemiro start with Ugarte? It was quite telling. I think after Garnacho scored, a lot of United players went to Casemiro for the pass he played to Diogo Dalot, clearly conscious that his confidence needs to lift. Xerxes probably has to continue. It's a good opportunity for him to get some goals and maybe get his confidence back up after missing two very good chances at Southampton. So I don't think United have gone out in the third round of the League Cup since it would have been Derby in 2018. Obviously, Derby were lower league, albeit the Championship, and they got to the playoff finals that season. But that was a particularly fraught day and night. I think Paul Pogba was stripped of the vice captaincy before kick-off, and then United needed an added time goal to trigger a penalty shootout. And then, as Jose Mourinho said, I knew we were in trouble when we had Phil Jones and Eric Bailly to take the penalty, and Phil Jones didn't convert his penalty, and that was United done for in the League Cup. And the following morning, it was that clip of Mourinho and Pogba having a bit of a tiff, to say the least, at Carrington. So, as eventful as it's been at Cumberland United over the last year, it was pretty possibly more incendiary back then.
Yeah, absolutely. Barnsley lost 3-0 at Stevenage at the weekend, which
thank you.
I guess you could interpret
bodes well for United.
It does bode well for United, yeah. They've also already lost to United this season already, of course, in the EFL Trophy.
Oh, yes, yeah.
I think Barnsley were 2-0 up at home with 9 minutes to go, and United won 3-2. Yeah, Jack Fletcher with 2 late goals and Ethan Ennis. And I mean, Harry Amads, Toby Collier, and Ethan Wheatley all played the full game that day, as did Tom Heaton. Yeah. You'd have to think Amads, Collier, and Wheatley would have a chance of getting some minutes, maybe. This weekend, I mean, let's go through what sort of changes we expect then. You're right that Ten Hag hasn't really rotated much. It's always felt like he kind of had his fingers burnt in that Real Sociedad game and has been very reluctant to do it ever since. But this is now a deeper squad than I think he had at that point. It's more his squad than he's ever had at that point. And you look at it and there's got to be changes, you would think. I mean, you'd want to give Amads a chance at left back. Surely you played Bayinda, still only played once for United. Defence, I think De Ligt and Martinez is beginning to look a really good partnership, but you've got options again there, really, Maguire and Evans. There's a stronger case to be made here, I think, for making probably 7 or 8 changes. Anthony, I mean, do you start Anthony? It feels like he probably needs to start. I mean, what sort of team are you picking, and how far do you want to go with changes, and do you expect Ten Hag to go with changes?
I mean, the goalkeeper should change. The only game Onana's not played for United was while he was on AFCON duty, wasn't it? At Newport last season, and it's rare that a backup goalkeeper only gets one appearance in the season. So it should be Binder or Heaton. I'd always like to see Tom Heaton because I think he's the better goalkeeper. I've not really, from that game at Newport, there wasn't really a lot about Binder to write home about. Not that it was the most testing of games, even though Newport did, of course, come from 2-0 down to make it 2-2 briefly. But certainly change there. It would be illogical to start the 2 senior fullbacks when, I mean, it looks like one of them will have to start just because of the shortage of options there with Malacia and Shaw still injured. But I think that's an excuse alone to bring Amads in. Maguire maybe for Martinez. Martinez was playing in South America last week, and I think clearly Ten Hag is conscious during games of trying to maintain freshness in defence. He's done this quite a few times. I think he's done it in every game, hasn't he? Where he's made unenforced changes to the back four. Clearly burnt from what happened last season with the amount of times defenders got injured and how decimated that department was for the majority of the season. So I think there've got to be at least 2 changes in defence. De Ligt, he had a bit of cramp at the weekend. Some of us spoke to him in the mid-zone afterwards, and he clarified it was just that he wasn't injured. So it's either all change or it's one change there. I think that United could easily get away with Maguire and Evans starting against Barnsley a few days after they've been hammered by Stevenage. I think with Ugarte in midfield, it's possibly politically more logical and sensible to start Casemiro. I think if Casemiro started on the bench against Barnsley with Ugarte and Collier ahead of him, there could be some rancor there. So and also for Ugarte easing in, even though it's against a third tier side, it's probably more prudent to have Casemiro next to him rather than a rookie who's only got a couple of substitute appearances to his name. Bruno Fernandes will want to start because he wants to start every game, and it's not an outright alternative to him there at the moment, is there? Mason Mount's injured, Scott McTominay's in Naples now. I'd probably keep Rashford in just to get his confidence up, give Amad a breather, start Garnacho, and obviously Xerxes has to start because there's not another senior striker available with Højlund still recovering from his hamstring strain. But ideally, if you're in the coaching office at Carrington and planning for this game, you're probably planning it, looking at it, hoping, thinking, if we get this game won by half time or the hour mark, we can make these changes at this point and give these players a breather ahead of the weekend's game.
Yeah, it feels like he probably does have to start Casemiro, really. I mean, it felt damning on Casemiro that he wasn't in the team on Saturday, given that Ugarte wasn't either. Like I said, I don't think any of us saw.
And then he wasn't going to come on, was he?
He wasn't even going to come on and then came on for a centre back because of an injury. I don't think any of us saw Eriksen starting ahead of him and mainly playing that deeper role, and took a bit of time to get going, but they did eventually flourish there. I thought Eriksen's passing and forward passing was very good throughout the game. With Ugarte, I mean, do you give him maybe 45 minutes with a view to starting him against Palace? I suppose it's the Premier League games where you really want him, isn't it? It's Palace, it's Tottenham coming up where you really want him starting. And I mean, from what we saw on Saturday, having looked at the highlights, it's obviously late in the game when we're very busy at times, but he did offer some physicality to that midfield when he came on and some tenacity to that midfield when he came on. And I guess the target and the aim has to be to get him ready for Saturday as much as anything.
I agree, because I think playing Eriksen and Mainu at Palace would be one game too far. They hadn't started together until the weekend since the Nadir at Palace last season, where it was clearly going to be a problem, and Ten Hag's hand was forced because Harry Maguire had got injured. Was it the day before or a couple of days before? So Casemiro had to drop back to centre back. Well, I think he was playing at centre back at that point, but he was without Maguire, who'd been playing well at that point. And possibly the two worst performers in that game at Selhurst back in May were Eriksen and Casemiro from memory. So it's pretty obvious that with Ugarte that there has to come a point where you've paid this money for a player who's clearly been signed as a starter. You need to make him a starter sooner rather than later, ahead of a crucial run of Premier League games. They've got, is it the 20 game next week, isn't it, as well? So there's an opportunity for more rotation there to keep other players sweet or to at least placate players. But I think Eriksen and Mainu would be a real no-no against Palace at the weekend. I mean, Palace, as I said earlier, they've not won a game yet, but I think some of their performances have been a lot more impressive than the 2 points that they've accrued suggests. I was impressed with them against Brentford. They showed good character clearly at the weekend to come from 2-0 down to get a late draw. Against Leicester, they got a decent points at Chelsea as well. They're an impressive side. They've just not made an impressive start, so you don't want to underestimate them. And I completely agree with you. You look with Ugarte, it's like just try and get him acclimatised, give him an hour. It's obviously going to be a very different game on Saturday, but he does need a start under his belt at club level, and he is match fit. Let's not forget that he did start twice for Uruguay during the recent internationals.
Yeah, absolutely. And we should say we're recording this. It's midday now on Monday. The press conference is at the lovely time of 4 p.m. on a Monday afternoon, which should be fun on the M60 for you afterwards. So we'll get a bit more insight. It was due to be now, yes, and it's been moved to 4 p.m. A change in the manager's schedule rather than a deliberate attempt to annoy journalists. We are told, but it's probably had the latter effect as well, which might be considered a bonus by some at Carrington. Let's finish back on a very positive topic from the weekend. Then, while we've been recording, the story's gone live that United expected to offer Amad a new long-term contract that you've done. I don't think there's any surprise there. His deal expires this summer. I think United have the option, but he has proven himself worthy of a new deal with a pay rise rather than just the option. And it has been, forgetting just a weekend for now, it's been a remarkable rise, really. I mean, 9 games ago, he hadn't started for United in 2.5 years. He's gone from, in 9 games, from looking like a potential candidate to have been sold in the summer, very much a fringe player who was being used off the bench by Ten Hag best, to someone who is essentially undroppable. And I think he is very, very deserving of a new contract. And that is probably, out of all the contracts that expire in 2025, it's probably become the priority for United now.
Yeah, it's been heading in that direction for a while. He switched agencies in the summer. He's now at the same agency as Alejandro Garnacho. Garnacho signed a 5-year contract with United in April 2023. Amads is another young winger who United regard as an integral squad member. I think I did that story back in June, that his position and his standing in the squad had changed. He was now regarded as one of these players to really build a team around, build a squad around for hopefully for them a successful future. And as you said, given his situation there, where there's a +1 option, so they if a new contract's not agreed by the end of the year, I think it's inevitable that United will trigger that extension, because otherwise he can agree a pre-contract deal with overseas clubs in the January transfer window. So they have got time on their side, given that there is a maximum expiry date of June 2026. But he's just had such a good calendar year, and he's taken his opportunities when they've come his way, whether it was as a substitute and generally impressing in testing circumstances. Because I said earlier, I think he came on 9 times last season, and United were either losing or drawing in all of them, and he often made an impression. And then when he was a starter, or came into the starting lineup, he did very well against Arsenal, kept his place, scored a few days later against Newcastle, and it was getting to the point where he was. It was a debate as to whether he would start the FA Cup final, and despite that disappointment, United have made it known how important he is to them. He had a very, very good pre-season. You saw him in Edinburgh, where he seemed to tear it up against Rangers, and then I thought he was just their best player in the United States. And the fact that he was doing media duties as well, he did a press conference, reflected really well on him. His English is pretty good. He seems like quite a shy but very affable young lad, and the fact that he was doing that when there were about 4 or 5 British players who were steadfastly refusing to do any media obligations whatsoever reflected, I thought, even better on him. But that's there are a couple of young lads in that squad, or a few, I should say, Mainu, Garnacho and Amads. You can tell their mentality is spot on. I mean, Garnacho, it would be easy to sulk about not starting. And United were keen to clarify that his demotion at the weekend wasn't related to his daft activity on social media, liking a post that carried quotes from Ronaldo criticising Ten Hag. But he comes on, and I thought he was electric. Mainu is... okay, he's had a subdued start, but he's been brilliant for United for the majority of his time. And as we've discussed about Amads, there have been some real tough moments for him at United. He's had a couple of bad, ill-timed injuries. He didn't have a good time of it on loan at Rangers. When he was signed, it's still difficult to know or discern who was the driving force behind that deal, because it wouldn't have been Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. It wouldn't have been John Merton necessarily, because he wasn't the football director for another 5.5 months. It wouldn't be Ed Woodward compiling the scouting reports, or Matt Judge doing the scouting reports. So he was one of those curious signings where the feedback was so good, they thought this was an opportunity they couldn't pass up on. And for a while, people wondered, that's going to be 37 million down the drain, or however much money. I think it was 19 million up front, so not necessarily the full sum. But over the turning point for him was that loan at Sunderland. He was excellent at Sunderland, and unfortunately for him, he got injured early on in pre-season last year. But it worked out well for him in the end, in that he came back into the squad. He did have opportunities, and it's just been a very gradual upward curve for him at United, and long may it continue.
Yeah, absolutely. We've said many a time, I think, over the last 4 years that 37 million fee, or 19 million plus 18 million add-ons for a player who had played 24 senior minutes at the time, looked pretty weird, and there's been plenty written about, you know, the intricacies of the deal and the fact it come out of nowhere. But it is beginning to look like a bit of a bargain for United. And like I say, he should be the first name. Well, certainly the first choice right winger now for the foreseeable future, and would thoroughly deserve a new contract. Right, I think we'll leave it there for today. Samuel, we'll let you head off to Carrington shortly. I hope the and thank you, everyone.
I didn't catch that there; it just broke up.
Sorry, I was just wishing you good luck on the M60 for later, Samuel. I hope you're not stuck in traffic for too long.
Yeah, and I hope I've not infected Matthias de Ligt after speaking to him in close proximity at the weekend. So
that will be awkward now if de Ligt is ruled out through illness by Ten Hag this afternoon.
Through illness, yeah.
So yeah, fingers crossed that isn't going to happen. Thanks everyone for joining us. We'll be back later in the week, probably on Friday, to look back at the Barnsley game and preview Palace. Remember to leave us a like, give us a review, preferably 5 stars, and subscribe so you get all the podcasts in your feed. But for now, thanks for joining us, and we'll speak to you soon.